I'd now like you to view a PSA. What is a PSA? It stands for Public Service Announcement. It is a message of public interest which is aired by the media without charge. The objective is to raise awareness about changing public attitudes and behavior towards the abuse of children and the damaging effects this can have on such innocent victims.
Please watch.
Well, I'd like to tell you, very briefly, 2 sad stories to illustrate what will not happen. Now, here's sad story number 1.
Consider what happened to Erica Garza. By the time she was 16, Erica's family had moved away from Othello to a new home and new Kingdom Hall in California, where one day she found the courage to tell her family her terrible secret. And what did her father, Reuben Garza, do? Report it to the police?
No, never mentioned report it to the police. Take care of it in the congregation.
Reuben Garza, who was one of the church's lay ministers or elders, says that's precisely what Jehovah's Witness leaders had taught him. And so instead of going to the police, he and his wife Alejandra called the elders back in Othello.
I called my elders and I said, look, I'm taking it to the police.
What did they say?
Don't. Or else.
Or else what?
That's what I said. I said, or else what? And he said, just don't. I said, what? I'll be disfellowshipped? If I take it to the police, is that what's going to happen to me? And he said, yes, you will be disfellowshipped. And I was just like, what? You're going to disfellowship me for being raped, yet the guy who raped me is still a Jehovah's Witness? And they said, don't take it to the police. You will be condemned by God.
When it comes to the matter of reporting, then that's something that parents can decide. We certainly never tell them not to report a case of child molestation.
You know, the church now says they don't have a special problem. It's a societal problem, and they do everything they can to stop pedophiles from hurting children within the Jehovah's Witness Church. What do you say to them?
Liars.
That's sad story number 1. On its heels, we have sad story number 2.
For years, he said nothing, afraid the elders wouldn't believe him. When he finally did speak out, his instinct as a 9-year-old proved right.
It's not so much did they believe me, did they want to believe me, They didn't want to believe me. I think they turned up at my house, They weren't open-minded, and I think they'd already made their mind up even before they got to my house,
The police did believe him, and they tracked down a second boy who'd been abused by Patty. In Birmingham, as in New Hampshire, the elders supported the accused. Even after Patty was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in jail, they didn't waver. At the next meeting in the Kingdom Hall, the elders made sure the congregation knew where they stood.
There was an announcement given saying, as a body of elders, that's including every elder in Rubery, we feel as a body of elders, basically, this man is innocent, we believe he's innocent, and the Bethel have informed us they will do everything in their power to help this man.
Now, why mention those sad stories? Now, here's the reason.
The database, Mr. Briggs. Why should the Jehovah's Witnesses keep a database of men who have confessed to being paedophiles, but the police aren't told? Do you think that's reasonable behaviour, Mr. Briggs?
So how many names are on the secret database? We asked the headquarters in New York. They refused to tell us. Focusing on numbers isn't meaningful, they said.
In a letter to Dateline, the church's general counsel adds that it is possible that a few of the 77,799 elders of Jehovah's Witnesses have not followed the direction that they have been given regarding investigating and reporting child abuse.
I was given a figure of over 20,000. 2 different sources came back to me and said that number is actually more specific and gave me a figure of 23,720. They told me that they had accessed the internal database, and that figure was based on child molesters in the USA, Canada, and Europe. And that's the figure that they were given.
The aforementioned statistics have been collected by our brothers, so we can trust these figures.
The London headquarters, the Bethel, refused to discuss any specific case. They said this was because the elders had to respect the confidentiality of the victims. But the victims wanted answers.
We should strive very hard not to ever try to get to know confidential things we're not entitled to know.
We again asked for an interview with their spokesman, Paul Gillies. When he refused, we phoned him, told him we were recording, and asked a simple question. Are elders told to report allegations of abuse to the police or not?
The elders' guideline is if you get any single allegation of child abuse come to your attention, phone this office.
Why phone this office? Why not phone your local police station?
Well, you see, the first thing is we have to make sure for the protection of the child.
Is it the protection of the child, or is it fair to ask you, isn't it the protection of the church that comes straight to mind there?
It is the protection of the child. We have a child protection policy.
We'd been told we'd find a member of the governing body here. Ted Jarretts is one of the men responsible for the church's child protection policy. For more than 2 months, we've been asking them for an interview. We want answers to some simple questions. Why do they keep their database of suspected paedophiles secret? Why don't they report all allegations of abuse to the police? Why do they send children back to the arms of their abusers? They'd refused to talk to us, but here at last, we had our chance.
Tell me about the database. How do you justify keeping a list of people, men in some cases, who have confessed to paedophilia, but you have not reported them to the authority? What justification is there for you to keep that list?
You have a privacy law. You have a directive from the European Union. You observe that, don't you?
So when allegations of abuse are made, it's all right to keep them private?
I think you were answered. That question was answered to your, should be to your satisfaction.
Can you answer it now?
I'm not going to repeat. I'll just tell you exactly that you can go and you see it in writing. It's all in print. You know, the Bible says, do not go beyond the things that are written. We don't go beyond the things that are written.
And that was that.
Let's move this way, please.
No doubt, no second thoughts. Just a simple belief that Jehovah will sort it out. A belief for which others, younger and more vulnerable, may continue to pay a price.
He was not ignorant, he knew, but somehow he must have rationalized.
We were 100% in support of the kingdom. We were representing God's kingdom as God's ambassadors or envoys here upon the earth.
I was born and raised, some of you already heard this, as a Jehovah's Witness. My father was a Bethelite for 13 years during Tipsy Joe Rutherford's time, and my mother was a coal porter. My parents and I lived in the North Bronx and often entertained the elite of the Watchtower, meaning Noor and Franz and George Couts, along with the branch servants from Finland, Erkki Ganghangba and Peter Wenzel, the South African branch servant. My parents also did extensive amount of translation of the Finnish language for the society. Some of it was done at home, and some of it was done at the Brooklyn Bethel, which I accompanied my parents. It was during one of these visits to Bethel that a Bethel family member sexually molested me or raped me. His name was Leo Greenleaf, and I was not his only victim, as I mentioned earlier.
Another way we can contribute to the oneness, rejecting false stories that are designed to separate us from Jehovah's organization. As an example, think about the apostate-driven lies and dishonesties that Jehovah's organization is permissive toward pedophiles. I mean, that is ridiculous, isn't it? If anybody takes action against someone who would threaten our young ones and takes action to protect our young ones, it's Jehovah's organization. We reject outright such lies.
I understand you wish to swear on the Bible this afternoon, is that correct?
Right.
Could you hold the book in your right hand, please, and then repeat
after me.
I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much.
My full name is Paul Stewart Gillis, and I'm associated with the Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, having served here in Britain for many years at the branch office.
And in September 2005, you were appointed as a member of the governing body of the Jehovah's Witnesses.
That is correct.
And as I understand it, you've served continuously in that capacity since then.
That is correct as well.
You were appointed as Director of the Office of Public Information of the Jehovah's Witnesses in 2018. Could you explain to us what that means your role currently is?
Well, the Office of Public Information shares accurate information about our beliefs and practices with the various publics, including the news media, academia, and also government officials.
And is your organisation growing or diminishing in the 21st century in the UK?
Well, worldwide, we had 300,000 newly baptised ones last year, just over. In the UK, it is growing.
OPI's assignment now includes conveying accurate words of truth to government officials.
The truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Accurate words of truth.
And you oversaw the activity of both what's called the service department and the legal department.
Yes.
What is it that the service department and the legal department do?
In relation to child abuse or just generally?
Well, maybe just a little bit generally, but largely in relation to dealing and managing with child sexual abuse.
So the service department cares for communications with our congregations. So you've mentioned a few things there, disseminating matters that come from our world headquarters. They also organise our conventions, they organise our schools, they organise our public ministry, they organise the care of our kingdom halls, and so forth. The legal department cares for, well, legal matters, which could be all sorts of things, property matters and so forth. But with regard to child sexual abuse matters, they give direction about the law, how the law relates to this subject.
Would the people in the service department or the legal department that might receive telephone calls, would any of them received any specific training in child protection?
When you say specific training, yes, they're given specific training as far as our policies and familiarising themselves with our policies.
So you don't have some other religious organisations that we've had evidence from, they will have a sort of child protection department that will often be staffed by people who may share the same religious beliefs, but who will have outside expertise in social work, usually social work, the probation service, education sometimes the law. You don't have that kind of department or that kind of arrangement.
Not in that organised way, no, simply because we don't feel it relates to what we do as a religion.
And from the next sentence, responsible Christian men do their part by setting an example of obedience as they put such arrangements into effect. Are we to understand that the expectation of the governing body is that the branches around the world will act in accordance with those procedures and guidelines?
That is the expectation.
Elders are meant to follow those practices and stick to them with quite strict adherence. Is that right? So things which are issued should be followed. They're not, you can do this if you want, you don't have to.
Well, that's when it comes to organisational procedures.
And in turn, the congregations are expected to obey the branches.
Again, first of all, they have to obey Jehovah God. That is the very first thing that they need to do. But if direction is given based on the Bible, we would expect that they would follow that because of their respect of the Bible. If the direction given is scripturally correct, then we would expect that these members of the branch committee, who themselves also are Christians who accept the Constitution, would follow that direction.
And the definitive interpretation of the Bible from time to time is the governing body. Is that right?
Ultimately, as guardians of our doctrine and beliefs, yes,
Some central group needs to make that decision.
And what I'm about to reveal to you today, Jehovah is behind it. Not the governing body, not any human here on the earth, but Jehovah God. He helps us to see things.
And do you see yourselves as Jehovah God's spokespeople on earth?
That, I think, would seem to be quite presumptuous to say that we are the only spokesperson that God is using.
I spoke to Jehovah just before I stepped out here.
Acts 20:30 says that apostates speak twisted things. They do this in order to draw God's sheep away and make them followers of themselves. Something that's twisted is bent out of shape or distorted by leaving out vital details.
A few grains of truth were mixed in with falsehoods.
Taking things out of context, or in some other way manipulating a truth into a lie.
And those who lie are doing exactly what their father does.
But what does the voice of strangers say on this subject? Don't trust the faithful slave. He will mislead you. Some examples of their strange teachings are that the faithful slave protects pedophiles. Bald-faced lies.
And you accept, of course, that your organization, including people in positions of responsibility like elders, are not immune from the problem of child sexual abuse.
That appears to be the case.
So that was the truth.
Where it says there in paragraph 4 that the governing body approves publications, does that include the Awake and Watchtower publications?
Yes, that does.
And your governing body provides direction and guidance, as I understand it, principally through publications.
But I take it the governing body takes responsibility for those publications.
We do take spiritual responsibility for it, yes.
Today we're going to address a very, very serious matter, perhaps a very sensitive matter, a heartbreaking matter really in many cases. We're going to look at love and justice in the face of wickedness, and we're going to look at that particular area of child abuse.
Article number 19 is love and justice in the face of wickedness.
Because as we'll learn as we go through the material, sexual abuse against children is like a plague at the moment, isn't it, in the world?
And there's a growing recognition, the reason for your inquiry, is because there is a problem with child abuse. It's getting worse and worse and has done over the years.
Sadly, child sexual abuse is a worldwide plague, and true Christians have been affected by this plague. Why? Wicked men and impostors abound, and some may try to enter the congregation.
You identify abusers, in effect, as being the wicked ones, as being those who are sort of outside God, and that it's a worldwide plague, and wicked men and impostors abound. You know, even from your own accounts and your own records, there have been a number of elders and those who've had senior positions within the church who have been responsible for child sexual abuse.
Wrought from within.
It's very sad to say that such people could enter the Christian congregation, because the scripture there in Timothy makes the point that wicked men and impostors will advance from bad to worse, misleading and being misled.
Let's not be naive.
When we're in the truth and we love our brotherhood, and especially if we've been in the truth a long time, we could be very naive to the way the world is.
Let's not be naive.
When someone who is a part of the congregation becomes guilty of child abuse, he brings reproach on the congregation. How unfair that is to the millions of faithful Christians who are putting up a hard fight for the faith. We do not tolerate in our midst individuals who unrepentantly commit wicked deeds and who bring reproach on the good name of the congregation.
Questions 6 and 7. How is child abuse a sin against the congregation and against the secular authorities?
When we come into the truth and we see the value of the Bible, we never realise this can come in the congregation, do we?
And we could say that all the witnesses now tarred with the same brush, aren't they? People think bad of the witnesses just for one silly, stupid act that someone did.
Nothing we've experienced it here, but probably in some areas where child abuse has been confirmed in congregations, I should imagine it's very, very difficult to do the ministry. It's been very, very difficult to bring people into the truth, because that would put a barrier up, wouldn't it?
Thank you. And it does say that it's also unfair to faithful Christians. Interesting what it says about the elders' role. What it isn't and what it is.
It said that they're not authorised to enforce the law of the land, but they wouldn't shield any perpetrator from the consequences of his sin.
Thank you. Paragraph 9, please.
Elders have received detailed scriptural training on how to handle the sin of child abuse. The organisation continues to review the way congregations handle the sin of child abuse. Why? To make sure that our way of handling the matter is in harmony with the law of the Christ.
Are these things being reviewed because secular laws are reviewed on a regular basis? Is that why we have to try and keep up, Sister?
No, it's Jehovah's standard, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you. That is the gold standard, isn't it? And if we need to review it, it's because we haven't quite hit the mark ourselves yet. And I think compared to many, perhaps, parents in the world, we do have more information than most, don't we?
The NSPCC looked at your policies quite a long time ago now, back in 2009. We have a copy of the report they made. You can see the recommendation there was that the Watchtower, Bible and Tract Society of Britain should seek child protection professional assistance in developing their organisational safeguarding systems, either via a local safeguarding children's board or via an independent child protection consultancy, for example, the NSPCC or others. Have you, by any chance, used either of those organisations, either a local safeguarding children's board or an organisation such as the NSPCC, to help you devise the child protection systems you have?
The answer is no.
Who have had training on how to handle that?
The faithful and discreet slave have seen the need to train all elders.
Jehovah and Jesus have given us a fine, well-chosen gift in the form of the elders.
Many of the elder schools we have, there may be a unit covering this. It's never easy to listen to a lot of the time, but it's necessary and very important, so that should the need ever arise, we will deal with things in accordance with Jehovah's law in that season.
Thank you.
Those elders wouldn't have any specific training in dealing with allegations of child sexual abuse. They might have spiritual training in terms of scriptural advice, support and assistance, but there wouldn't be any sort of practical training necessarily. Am I correct in thinking that?
Well, the practical training is basically reviewing the material, reviewing our policies on child abuse. Such as has been mentioned, they get the shepherding or the flock handbook that's given to elders. They would go through that, which is giving them specific instructions about how to handle such matters. So we do train our elders according to our guidelines and our ways of handling allegations of child abuse.
Right. Okay.
As we will discuss, all of us must make sure that we always show appreciation and respect for this divine provision.
what motivates elders to actually care for individuals in the congregation is that we believe they belong to God.
Now, this will be well illustrated in the following video interview.
Ms. Porter, respectfully, the allegation here is the mental and emotional equivalent of waterboarding. Surely you have to agree that if the allegations in the complaint are true, the conduct was reprehensible.
Well, my problem may be that I've heard the tape and I know that it's not true. I understand the allegation.
You've heard a tape. You've heard a tape, which in the First Amended complaint, the plaintiffs strongly dispute is the tape. You heard a 6-minute tape versus a multi-hour tape.
Usually with helping for a victim, well, that's a shepherding that may have to go on for some period of time.
Apparently several hours.
Assume the truth, right, of that allegation. Surely you would agree that's reprehensible conduct.
You mean for purposes of an IIED claim? I mean,
for purposes of general human decency.
I guess the reason I'm struggling with your question, and if I may, this proceeding was called for the specific purpose of determining whether she had sinned, whether she was repentant.
The elders are there with the brothers and sisters, encouraging them and keeping the congregations clean.
What training have they had if you may be dealing with issues, I accept it spiritually, but spiritually in terms of child sexual abuse or other matters involving sexual crimes, have they had any particular training in managing or dealing with victims of sexual crime or in managing or training with dealing with vulnerable witnesses?
You have to bear in mind that elders are trained as spiritual counselors. They're trained how to help somebody in the congregation if they want to be helped. They make an assessment as to whether someone should be expelled from the congregation.
How can we demonstrate that we do deeply respect and appreciate these dear brothers? The first way, by wholeheartedly cooperating with them.
It's yes or no. I mean, are you telling me that if the allegations in the complaint are true, you think that that's not reprehensible conduct?
Well,
and when it comes to the judicial hearing, if there's enough evidence, if the individual has confessed to the wrongdoing anyway, there is certainly no need to talk further to a victim.
Remember, the other participant denied that it was a physical rape and actually provided at least some evidence. So they now had a dispute. This happens in court.
Defaulted, right? Pardon? So the other participant defaulted. So with respect to the other participant, the allegations are true.
Well, but that's not binding on us. I mean, when another defendant defaults,
I didn't say it's binding on you, but for purposes of that defendant in this litigation, he has admitted the rape.
Our literature has said, and we agree, that in most cases with children with child abuse, they are telling the truth. That's an established thing. They're not making up these stories.
But the problem I have is that the entire purpose of this core function was to determine whether she had sinned.
Do you have a referral mechanism for access to counselling or therapy? Do you ever pay for pastoral support therapy or counselling for those members of your congregation where child sexual abuse has taken place?
Our elders give of their time and provide this counselling help as they're able to in the course of their life on a voluntary basis.
But there isn't any formal counselling service, referral service to local counselling services?
No, there isn't.
And just on the matter of making a judgment, they take it very seriously. Brothers will pray over a prolonged period of time. They will stick very closely to the direction they receive from Jehovah's organisation. They will not go beyond the things that are written.
You know, the Bible says, do not go beyond the things that are written. We don't go beyond the things that are written.
The governing body tries to make sure that they don't go beyond what is written.
We simply cannot go beyond what is written.
We are told to be obedient. Clearly, this means that we're supposed to comply with or obey what they tell us. Of course, that would be with a proviso, unless they tell us to do something that is unscriptural.
And the definitive interpretation of the Bible from time to time is the governing body. Is that right?
Ultimately, as guardians of our doctrine and beliefs, yes.
How do you, first of all, you could say, well, maybe they didn't need to do that.
Being obedient and submissive to those taking the lead is much more important than how something is done. That is the attitude that Jehovah will richly bless.
But I'm trying to figure out how you second guess how they handled this judicial committee.
Be obedient and submissive to the elders. So why don't we go ahead and support the elders?
And I'm not saying whether these things are okay or not. I'm saying that these things happen in court all the time when you are trying to determine the truth. And here it is a core religious function.
I've been a judge for a long time and a lawyer for a long time. I've never seen in court anything like this that's alleged.
The audio?
So I take issue with that.
So where do you draw the line? If a religion believes in order to have someone repent, you have to torture that person. You have to do something that outside of the religion society would deem outrageous. Are they allowed to do that? Is that not even a viable claim?
Oh, I don't think torture no, you can't do torture. I mean, the reason I'm struggling is that I don't believe that it's this court's role to prospectively define lines.
We try to help individuals to reason on Bible principles. So it's not as if elders give instructions as to how a person should live their lives.
We should be obedient and submissive, even if what the elders are asking us to do is not the best, most efficient way to do something.
The problem I have is that it's second guessing what everyone agrees these guys were trying to do, which was to make a fact finding. If we can analogize to the jury, it's fact finding and then the punishment.
But if I understand your position, Ms. Porter, you say that there are some circumstances in which we would be permitted to second guess. Waterboarding, sexual assault, battery. And I know you're resisting helping us draw a line, but how do you draw a line between battery and the sort of outrageous conduct that is alleged here?
I mean, to me,
from a perspective of second guessing what's going on in that room, how do you articulate that?
You know, and in my mind, I'm just drawing a line mentally in terms of a physical assault or attack or whatever. And I'm not even predicting what different types of things there can be. I'm just simply saying this is not it.
Much of the elders' hard work in our behalf is not seen by the congregation.
This is a core activity.
And elders do many other things that are too numerous to recount.
This recording was exactly of what they were trying to determine in terms of the religious principles they were trying to apply.
We have to say, in behalf of the thousands of hardworking elders and ministerial servants, without your faithful support, it would be much more challenging to care for our responsibilities.
Brother Elder, we just want to thank you for your hard work. Please be assured that we appreciate it.
The elders are primarily concerned with maintaining the sanctity of God's name.
In paragraph 10, it says, the elders are primarily concerned with maintaining the sanctity of God's name. Could I just ask, what do you mean by that? Does that mean that the individual must be subjected to the whole? So the interests of the congregation are more important than the interests of the individual?
Be submissive. This includes the attitude with which we're to be obedient, doing so with a yielding, positive attitude.
We're interested in making sure that the high standards of holiness are applied in this context to our child protection policy.
Okay. But one then goes to 11 and it says,
In addition, if the wrongdoer part of the congregation, elders are concerned with trying to restore him, if that is possible.
So, in a way, the elders are trying to back two horses at the same time, because one and the other might not necessarily be compatible with each other. Am I not right?
It says their scriptural counsel can help him to restore his relationship with God. That's only possible if he is genuinely repentant.
The latest name added to the list should be that of James Barrett. 3 days ago, clutching his Bible, this elder from Rugby was convicted of indecently assaulting 2 boys and sentenced to 2 years in prison. The church was told of the allegations 5 years ago, but Barrett denied them and was allowed to remain an elder.
So again, the standards of holiness connected with God's holy name, Jehovah, that's what we're interested in. And if possible, if an individual can restore his relationship with God, which is primary, that's where we try to help the individual.
There's nothing here about the victim.
Jehovah appointed Moses, didn't he, to be the mediator of the law covenant of the prophets. So even though we all have to obey Jehovah's laws, like Moses, he was appointed. Our elders are appointed. They have to take extra care in maintaining Jehovah's name.
Thank you. So, primary concern is Jehovah's name.
That does not make sense.
Do you think the brothers who write Watchtower articles are living in the real world?
Do elders comply with secular laws about reporting an allegation of child abuse to the secular authorities? Yes. In places where such laws exist, elders endeavour to comply with secular laws about reporting allegations of abuse.
Can I just ask you about one particular piece of language? It says, in places where such laws exist, elders endeavour to comply with secular laws. Why do you use the word endeavour? Do you know why that choice of word was used rather than must or will, or will or must would seem to me to be a more appropriate choice of language than endeavour, which has an element of, shall we say, discretion.
There may not be the possibility to report to the authorities, even if there's a law. One example that comes to mind just now, and I don't really know how they're handling matters, but Jehovah's Witnesses have been banned in Russia as a legal entity, as organizations. So I cannot imagine 2 of our elders going to a police station and say, we represent the local congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses and we've come to report a case of child abuse. They would probably get arrested and put in prison for 6.5 years for identifying themselves in that way.
A dilemma, a quandary.
Elders assure victims and their parents and others with knowledge of the matter that they are free to report an allegation of abuse to the secular authorities.
Why do you say, in these circumstances, you both say you never discourage and they may report? Why don't you encourage reporting? I suppose this is all, I would say, quite passive in terms of, on the one hand, you're an organisation which stresses strict adherence to moral codes, which has a series of very compelling requirements, shall we say, of adherence to the faith. On the other hand, so you have no problem telling people what to do in some circumstances, but you're not saying to them, you must do this, you should do this, it should always be reported. It's all much more kind of, we tell them that they can. Which seems to be strangely passive for an organisation which is so active in other parts of people's lives. There could be perceived to be an aspect of double standards in this respect, in that, for example, where in the elders' statement it says if there's a break-in, theft, arson or other incidents of vandalism, that should be promptly reported to the local authorities. So there does seem to be somewhat of a disjunct between property damage and personal damage.
So 13 and 14, do elders comply with secular laws about reporting an allegation of child abuse?
Yes, they do. They do report any case of sexual abuse. And the reason is that they're complying with Caesar's law as well as God's law. Because if they didn't, just imagine if they didn't say anything, what would happen if further on down the line.
Is the current guidance good enough in terms of making it absolutely clear that in these sorts of situations there should be reports to the police, so that even if the parents don't wish to report, it is the congregation's duty to do so to protect children? Do you think that don't you think your guidance needs to be strengthened in that respect?
Yes, I absolutely agree, and that's what has happened. If you refer back to the guidelines for the service desks, you have very clearly stated in paragraph 8, which we've been through, that a report will be given to the secular authorities, the police, if there is a child at risk. So,
but the difference is that those guidelines are pretty much the same between 2016 and 2019. The reality is that what's often happened is matters haven't been reported to the police, but have been dealt with internally.
We just clarify one thing though. If in the absence of 2 witnesses, does that mean we don't report it as a possible crime?
No, that requirement only applies to whether a judicial committee is formed in the congregation. Where there's an accusation, the secular authorities would still need to be informed.
Thank you.
It is the inquiry's view that the charity's trustees did not cooperate openly and transparently with the Commission. They did not provide accurate and complete answers to the Commission regarding the earlier allegations, and they did not report a serious incident to the Commission.
You notice there is a note that if they do investigate, what is that victim never required to do?
This is a great point, really. It says the child is never required to confront an alleged abuser. The parents or another trusted confidant may advise the elders of the allegation without exposing the child to further emotional harm.
If I can ask you to turn to Shepherd the Flock of God, paragraph 18, investigating allegations. Do you have it?
Yes.
During this investigation process in the Judicial Committee, a victim is not required to make her allegation in the presence of the alleged abuser. Now, can I just clarify, that was not always the case. Until I think the past 5 or 6 years, it would routinely have been the case that the victim and the accuser may have had to question, may have had to be in the same room together and have discussions with each other. Is that right?
Well, it's been the case, as long as I can remember, that no child was ever forced to or brought before a committee to face their accuser under any circumstances, even in the investigation process. That's long been our policy.
I think there might have been some circumstances where that may have happened. Could I ask you to look at Exhibit B29? The inquiry has evidence that meetings lasted for more than 3 hours and heard separate testimonies. The witnesses were asked inappropriate questions by both members of the appeal committee and Jonathan Rose, who was the alleged abuser. One member of the committee asked person B, "Did you ever egg him on, goad him on?" Jonathan Rose was allowed to ask person B, "What was I supposed to have done to you that night?" As she had already provided an account of the natures of her abuse, she responded, "You know what you did." Person B explained that she understood a member of committee to be instructing her to go into detail by telling her, "Answer the question." Person B did as she was instructed and gave her testimony again in front of 7 elders and Jonathan Rose.
So we mentioned the Judicial Committee. Let's see what the role of a Judicial Committee is. 17 and 18, please.
What is the role of the Judicial Committee? The term judicial does not mean that the elders judge or rule on whether the abuser should be punished by the authorities for breaking the law. The elders do not interfere with law enforcement. They leave criminal matters to the secular authorities. However, the elders will inform him that he may never qualify to receive any congregation privileges or to serve in any position of responsibility in the congregation. Out of concern for the welfare of children, the elders may privately warn the parents of minors in the congregation of the need to monitor their children's interactions with the individual.
We want you to know what we know.
They're warned about that individual.
But there's not a warning that goes to the congregation generally. Simply the parents would be visited on an individual basis. That's right, isn't it?
That is correct.
They then can still attend meetings and so on, but under some restriction, is that right?
Under a lot of restrictions, yes.
and members of the congregation cannot associate with them socially.
Socially or spiritually?
Yes. But the person is still otherwise in the world and can associate with people outside of the church.
Yes.
And you don't take into consideration, do you, how people outside of the church might be kept safe from such a person whom you're not satisfied will not reoffend?
If they were outside the church and they were a close friend, I would tell them.
Well, and how would you know if they're a close friend and they're outside of the church?
No, if they're a close friend of mine.
A close friend of yours?
If I was.
Yes.
If I associated with them.
Well, what about people who are not close friends of yours, others than outside of the church? You don't take any steps, do you, to protect them from this potential reoffending? You don't, do you? You're concerned with the congregation principally,
Yeah,
aren't you?
we're concerned with the congregations. We are shepherds of the congregation.
Yes, and you're not a shepherd to those who are not in the congregation.
No.
And as an organisation, in your experience, you don't seek to protect or take care of children who are outside of the congregation.
That's a broad statement.
Well, I can limit it.
Yeah, limit it,
In
please.
your decision on whether or not to disfellowship someone, you don't take consideration of children outside of the congregation.
Do take consideration of them, but what ability have we got to protect every child in Australia?
Well, what you can do is you can report to the child protection authorities.
And that is done in some cases.
But generally it's not done, is it?
No.
It's not done unless there's a legal requirement for it to be done, is there?
That is true.
And can I just double check? We've talked about there not being any sort of child protection department centrally or locally, because it sounds as if you don't have an elder who's in charge of child protection, for example.
We feel that any elder can be approached on child safeguarding matters.
We love you, dear elders.
But maybe there isn't two witnesses. It takes faith to trust Jehovah's direction, doesn't it? So the elders may feel, yes, there could be a case here, but we have no proof. They will wait on Jehovah.
Would it be better to wait on Jehovah to correct this situation?
Trust in Jehovah, but at the same time, they will keep an eye out on the congregation and care for them while things proceed and leave matters in Jehovah's hands. So it takes faith on our part as the congregation to trust that arrangement, doesn't it? And it takes faith too on the elders' part sometimes to wait and trust and not go beyond the things that are written.
Yeah, thank you. Because sometimes we might have the opinion that, well, they haven't been thrown out, they've got away with it. But again, what have we got to trust in? Haven't they got away with it because they haven't been thrown out?
We have to trust in Jehovah's way of doing things and trust that the body of elders have followed that pattern.
Yeah, because if we were running the congregation, we might do it totally differently, but I would say thank Jehovah we're not, because Jehovah's running the congregation, so hopefully we'll do things his way.
Jehovah is behind it. Not the governing body, not any human here on the earth, but Jehovah God.
Now, the governing body realizes that if we were to give some direction that is not in harmony with God's word, all of Jehovah's Witnesses worldwide who have the Bible would notice that, and they would see that it was wrong direction.
Keep in mind that the anointed are not the head of our organization. Jesus is.
Jesus is the one in charge.
And we hope all parents today raising children will teach them that fact.
Now, if they just take the time to check the facts, They'd see that they're being lied to, but they don't check the facts.
Such widespread abuse is clear evidence that we are living in the last days. It's an indication, considering the world that we live in today, we're living in the last days under these conditions. We're very close to the end of these days, aren't we? All these things are an indication that this system just has to end. If we think this system can carry on much longer when we discuss watchtowers like this, well, the system has got to end soon because of just this one terrible activity that people are practicing.
And the song that we're going to conclude with is Song 103, Shepherds, Gifts in Men. Jehovah, we really do thank you for the encouragement and the comfort that we've received here today. We've looked at the way that mankind has treated your wonderful creation. We've learned that we really have ruined it, not beyond repair, but almost to the point of not going back. But we know that we shouldn't get too concerned, that you really do have things in hand.
Well, what happened? The cases that we are here to announce are deeply disturbing, the allegations hard to imagine, while all sharing one common tie. The 19 victims and 4 men who are being charged with sexually violating them are all members of the Jehovah's Witness organization.
As you likely know, Jehovah's Witnesses take a stronger position than most on the scriptural inappropriateness of any form of immorality. However, to take advantage of innocent young ones is absolutely despicable.
Most of these defendants used their faith and church to gain access to their victims, to build their trust, and then molested them. Children who have a right to grow up in a safe community, but were defiled by members of their own congregations. Some defendants only looked as far as their own families to commit their abuse. My office will not stop until these defendants are held accountable for the crimes against innocent children and until justice is achieved for these courageous survivors.
It is only in the past 40 years or so that the magnitude and the extent of the problem has become better known. This is because governmental agencies are now determined to take a more active interest in this problem.
This investigation began with a resource referral from a local district attorney's office back in 2019. Based on that referral, our office undertook the investigation of allegations of sexual assault involving members of the Jehovah's Witnesses. Throughout that, we learned of several incidents of sexual assault committed by different members of the Jehovah's Witness religious organizations. And as a result of our 3-year investigation, hundreds of hours of grand jury testimony, and dozens of witnesses, we filed charges against 4 individuals. First, Jose Serrano, 69, of Lancaster County. During the investigation, it was determined that Jose Serrano used his influence and common faith to sexually molest at least 6 minors, including
his own daughter. He confessed to committing many of these criminal offenses to members of his community.
Others knew of the problem and covered it up.
You don't conduct, there are no external audits conducted of your child protection policies and practices, are there?
That's correct.
And is there any reason for that?
Because our policies are very weighted with how to deal with things within the congregation.
By going to the elders for assistance.
Two of Serrano's victims testified in front of our grand jury, providing detail about the abuse that they suffered at his hands, which included groping that escalated into forcible rape. Serrano's own daughter testified to the grand jury that her mother would remind her to lock the door at night if her father was around.
Rape at home? No further explanation needed on that.
Serrano was charged with aggravated indecent assault, and endangering the welfare of children. Jesse Hill. The grand jury heard testimony that Hill used his milling business to lure young boys in his Jehovah's Witness congregation with promises of alcohol, marijuana, and pornography.
The sort of organisation you have, which encourages close familial type relationships, significant bonds of trust and confidence, may be attractive to, or a situation where grooming and child sexual abuse could take place.
Our investigation identified at least 10 victims of Mr. Hill's sexual crimes. Hill made statements admitting to many of these crimes.
Homosexual men who prey on and advocate the right to use boys for sex. Shame on them.
Jesse Hill is charged with rape, involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, and corruption of minors. Robert Ostrander, 56 years old. Ostrander's abuse began in 2006 and was at first physical. This abuse was directed at his family. The grand jurors heard testimony from his stepdaughter, who said that by 15, the abuse became sexual, groping, and then wrestling, and then eventually sexual assault. Ostrander and his family, including his stepdaughter, were active members of Jehovah's Witness congregation. As a result of that membership and the relationship that he and his family enjoyed, his stepdaughter became friends with another girl Ostrander was given unsupervised access to. He exploited that access and sexually assaulted her as well. Ostrander is charged with indecent assault, endangering the welfare of children, and corruption of minors.
It is our fervent desire to protect children from any kind of abuse.
And finally, Eric Elam, 61 years old, of Butler County. The grand jurors heard testimony from Elam's daughter about the sexual abuse she suffered, including being forced to perform oral sex. She told the grand jury about her father's practice of using sexual molestation as discipline in the house where she was growing up.
It could be that the victim is familial and in the same congregation. So part of the same family, who knows?
She reported this abuse to her mother and to other members of her community.
It can get quite complex for elders, so we try and guide them through that process.
And the guide is they need an order of the court. We're not going to do it without an order of the court.
No. When there's a child at risk, they make a report to the police and they provide whatever information they have at that point.
Okay, so, but obviously in that case it didn't happen.
Laws were enacted requiring medical and other professionals to report cases to the authorities when they became aware of them.
As I understand, your elders or ministerial servants, either within the congregation or the branch office or circuit overseers, wouldn't have DBS checks other than what we would call basic DBS checks. None of them would meet the definition of regulated activity as you see it. Is that right?
That is correct.
Thank you very much.
Elam was charged by my office with rape, involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, aggravated indecent assault, and endangering the welfare of a child. These are the types of cases that haunt us. They leave an indelible mark on our souls. And as prosecutors, as people of faith, as parents, we can't escape the impact that these cases have. These 19 children, they deserved a place to grow up in peace, not to be preyed upon.
We're happy to see how Jehovah's organization continues to teach our young ones how to make wise choices when the figurative monsters of this world try to lure them into their traps.
This is an abuse of trust, an abuse of power. And I'll remind you that no matter what power you cloak yourself in, everyone is accountable under the law. And if you abuse a child, I want you to know that the Office of the Attorney General here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania will find you, and we will hold you accountable. As we do more and more of these horrific cases, our agents and prosecutors continue to get better at uncovering these crimes.
To end child abuse.
While some of the crimes that these men committed can't be charged due to the statute of limitations, we won't fail to hold them accountable for the crimes that we are charging them with here today.
So suppose a report indicates that someone has been charged with a crime or that he's being investigated. All right, you have two words, charged and investigated. It doesn't mean he's guilty.
Can I just ask, if someone's convicted of child sexual abuse, of a criminal offence, would they be automatically disfellowshipped, or would you still need to go through the scriptural process, given the requirement for there to be two credible witnesses for disfellowshipping to take place?
We would still go through the scriptural process to establish whether they should remain in the congregation or otherwise.
Or someone is found guilty by men, as Jesus was. It doesn't mean that he's guilty in the sight of God.
But that would only be if there were two credible witnesses. And as we identified yesterday, and as I think we identified this morning, the likelihood of there being two people who are witnesses to an offence of sexual offending against one individual is likely to be small.
Even with just the child's word, with one witness, with just the mother's word, without the two witnesses their Bible tells them they need.
Well, unfortunately, most kids don't have several witnesses observing them get raped. It's an unfortunate part of it.
These four presentments lay out the nature of our investigation. But I want you to know this investigation is very active and ongoing.
And again, remember that the world in general was still somewhat naive about the magnitude of this issue and the gravity of the problem.
Just over a year ago, Bill Bowen rang the legal desk in New York, asking how he should handle an allegation of abuse in his congregation. The advice he was given has little to do with protecting the victim. He was told to go back to the man accused.
You just ask him again, now, is there anything to this? If he says no, then I would walk away from it. Yeah. Leave it for Jehovah. He'll bring it out. Yeah. But don't get yourself in a jam.
As a religious organization, we have taken a decisive stand against such behavior.
So when Jesus talks about prison and a judge, he's obviously referring to what a Gentile judge would do. Now, you couldn't necessarily expect justice from him. Why might he rule against our brother? Well, maybe he got paid under the table by the other party. Or maybe he was prejudiced against the race or the religion of the other party.
Sexual abuse of children is not to be tolerated. And I don't care what their reasoning was. It was faulted reasoning. They were wrong, and as far as I'm concerned, they were criminally negligent.
I will not comment on these cases or any other matters related to this investigation beyond that at this time. But I will repeat our call to anyone who has suffered abuse. We want you to know that we are here and we are listening. We are urging anyone who has had a similar experience to come forward to tell us your story. We're here to listen, and we will act. Your case won't be swept under the rug. Your experience will not go unheard.
And it was so powerful to be believed.
Our work continues. Today we have the opportunity to reach out and to publicly ask if anyone has information regarding similar allegations of sexual assault. Please contact our office immediately. We have established a special hotline just for you. That number is 1-888-538-8541. Again, that special hotline we've established just for you is 888-538-8541.
What we see is often only the tip of the iceberg. 90% of an iceberg is unseen underwater.
As the prosecution begins, I think more information will be presented as we make our case.
And if I can also check, there is an ongoing investigation into the Watchtower, which I think has been ongoing for a number of years.
What has our position been as an organization?
We maintain the position that their inquiry is an inquiry into Watchtower, which doesn't have any concerns about child protection in the sense that it doesn't administer child protection.
We are proud of our reputation in this regard.
Whatever the inquiry suggests, we will cooperate with any regulatory body, just the same as we've cooperated with the Charity Commission.
Okay. Obviously, the Charity Commission have indicated in their new Mostyn report that they considered that the trustees in that report didn't cooperate, and they also noted that you sought to prevent the inquiry taking place, running various legal arguments around it for a number of years. That's also correct, isn't it?
Yes.
It is clear that over the decades, protecting children from abuse is a top priority for this organization.
So it has been frustrating that we've had 5 lead investigators over the period, and every time we've engaged with each one, we've tried to go over the same ground again, explaining our policy. So that's been a frustration to us.
Are there other suspects that you're still investigating? And do you have any reason to believe that nationally this could be a bigger national case with more suspects in other states?
All I can say is that our case is active and ongoing.
5 names announced today bring a total of 9 people since October last year who are facing charges in connection to that investigating grand jury.
These cases, as all of them are disturbing and sad. But this one, in particular, digs deeper. Because in this case, all of the defendants and all of the victims come from the same religious organization, the Jehovah's Witnesses. When we announced those charges against the 4 individuals, we asked for people to come forward, for anybody who had something similar like this happen to them, to reach out, to call our hotline and come to us. And many courageous survivors came forward and called the hotline. So as a result of our ongoing investigation and the individuals that reached out to us on our hotline, we are here today to announce these charges. Let me begin first with Mark Brown, 65, of Allegheny County. It is alleged that Brown repeatedly sexually abused 2 sisters for whom he was the legal guardian at the time. They were between the ages of 10 and 13 years old when this happened. They testified to being assaulted in the shower and other parts of the house that they shared with Brown when they were young girls.
Remember that children are often reluctant to report abuse. They may fear that they will not be believed.
I never told anyone about these things, that these rapes that occurred to me. It was multiple, it wasn't just one time.
I mean, that is ridiculous, isn't it? If anybody takes action against someone who would threaten our young ones, and takes action to protect our young ones, it's Jehovah's organization. We reject outright such lies.
Bald-faced lies.
Well, they may have been threatened by the abuser to keep the abuse secret.
He threatened the older sister that if she did anything to stop him, or if she told anyone, he would sexually abuse her younger sister. When in reality, that was already happening. He was already doing that to her. She didn't know it. Brown is charged with aggravated indecent assault, endangering the welfare of children, and corruption of minors. The next case is Raymond Schultz, 74, of Beaver County. It is alleged that Schultz repeatedly sexually assaulted his own granddaughters when they were between the ages of 5 and 10 years old. Both girls testified to being assaulted while visiting Schultz at his home. The girls' parents trusted him, asked him to watch them, and he betrayed that trust in the most horrendous way. He's been charged with aggravated indecent assault, endangering the welfare of children, and corruption of minors. The next case is Abamil Valentine Matos, 42, of Lancaster County. It is alleged that Matos abused a 15-year-old girl who at the time was half his age, claiming that he intended to marry her. He met this victim in 2009 at a Jehovah's Witness event that brought together multiple congregations. The congregation was aware of his romantic interest in the girl, noting that they would approve of it if certain conditions were met, including the presence of a chaperone and the commitment to eventually marry her. Matos' interest in the minor quickly turned sexual, and he began sending inappropriate photos and convinced her to meet him alone, no chaperone. During these meetings, he sexually assaulted her. He's been charged with indecent assault, indecent exposure, endangering the welfare of children, and corruption of minor. The next case is Kevin Isevich, 51, of Butler County. It is alleged that he sexually assaulted a member of his family when she was just 9 years old. The victim recalled playing with her cousins when he pulled her into his bedroom and assaulted her. The abuse only stopped that day when the defendant's wife returned home. He's been charged with rape, aggravated indecent assault, endangering the welfare of children, and corruption of minors. The next case is Norman Aviles, 44, of Lancaster County. It is alleged that he sexually assaulted 3 minors who were between the age of 5 and 10 years old. He was an elder in the Jehovah's Witness congregation, which allowed him to build a rapport with members. He gained the trust of several parents, including his own relatives, which gave him extensive access to young girls in the congregation.
You recognise, however, that the vast majority of child sexual abuse takes place within situations where adults are known to the children. And those who perpetrate child sexual abuse will often groom not just the child themselves, but the people around them. Do you accept that as 2 principles?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
These are people we know. These are people we love. These are people who have our best interests at heart.
As you probably know, in child abuse cases, it's very frequent that the individuals who prey on children do so in a way that they build trust with the adults around these children, such that they trust them and allow them access, never imagining that actually they're predators. That's a frequent thing that we see in these cases.
There are individuals who will abuse the privilege of being in the congregation if they're allowed to.
He was trusted to babysit and even act as a guardian to one of his victims.
This is a warning to be able to say, you look, it does happen. And it could be anyone in the congregation that does that.
He has been charged with aggravated indecent assault, endangering the welfare of children, and corruption of minors.
The latter part of our discussion has addressed what Jehovah's organization has done to protect children from predators.
These children deserve a community where they can grow, play, learn, and pray, and not be preyed upon.
Who have the responsibility to protect children from harm? Parents do. Your children are a sacred trust, an inheritance from Jehovah. It is your responsibility to safeguard that trust. What can you do to protect your children from abuse? First, educate yourself about abuse. Learn about the kind of individuals who abuse children and the tactics they use to deceive them. Be alert to potential dangers. Remember that in most cases, the abuser is someone the child already knows and trusts.
Protect your children.
From what I understand, Jehovah's Witness has its own internal judicial system. Have you investigated if they were aware of this, if they looked into it, and if so, will you be looking at the organization for any charges?
So now we're 9 deep, okay? Now, we've already got 9 cases that were covered up.
Wow.
So now here's where I'm going to tell you the big news. What I'm here to tell you today is that the Jehovah's Witnesses have been subpoenaed. Every single congregation in the state of Pennsylvania is now under subpoena, one county at a time, to turn over every single child abuse document in their possession going back to January 1st, 1987, up to about September of 2019, which is when those first subpoenas went out in York County, Pennsylvania. 1987 to 2019. Every elder is being called into a meeting with lawyers that have been hired by the society. The Watchtower Legal Department and the governing body have hired the same law firm that defended the Catholic Church when they were under subpoena from the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office.
It's just interesting in verse 4 of Romans 13 that it says that the secular authorities, it says it is God's minister, an avenger to express wrath against one practicing what is bad. So Jehovah has placed this authority in this situation, and under these circumstances, then the secular authorities have a role to play.
Yeah, thank you.
Will you be looking at the organization for any charges?
This is an ongoing investigation. Any other questions?
Do you have any form of redress scheme already in place for those who've been subject to child sexual abuse within the congregation, either in the UK or in other countries?
Well, we'll always care for individuals in a fair, loving and compassionate manner. And if we're talking about institutional abuse, then naturally we feel a responsibility. So we prefer to look at matters on a case-by-case basis.
Now, as I understand it, following the Australian Royal Commission, they set up a national redress scheme. And as I understand it, the Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses have decided not to join that scheme on the basis that they don't have the institutional settings that the redress scheme is designed to cover. Do you therefore believe that if, for example, the panel were in their final report to suggest that there should be some form of redress scheme for religious organisations and bodies, that you would take the same approach here in the UK?
We never said that we were against redress schemes as such. What we said was that the Australian one didn't apply to us.
Mr. Jackson, has the governing body considered apologising to survivors of child sexual abuse at the hands of elders within the organization?
I haven't been in any discussions with regard to that.
Is that something that you foresee might happen? In other words, that an apology at least be considered?
The governing body has apologised on other matters, so for me to say I can't speak collectively for everybody, but we have apologised on things in the past in other areas, so it is perceivable.
You might say, I am so sorry that happened to you. No child should be treated that way.
It would be like a governing body member. It would be like Stephen Lett coming out and saying, we are so sorry for what has happened to these victims.
The faithful slave protects pedophiles.
This is, this was bad management. It was our fault. We neglected the needs of these victims. We should have reported this.
Mr. Gillis, can I ask you whether your policies that you've described over the last 2 days contain anything about the provision of an apology where there's been institutional fault?
Our policies don't contain that, no.
And is something such as an apology ever given on a case-by-case basis? So you've talked a lot about dealing with things on a case-by-case basis. Is apology ever provided in those circumstances?
We would be very happy to look at the facts and see if an apology is necessary or called for.
You know, I'll never forget what happened in Montana when I was in the Nunez trial, and the jury had literally just awarded $35 million to the plaintiff against Watchtower, and Joel Taylor got up there because he was making his final plea to the jury. He said, we're a religious organization. We do charitable work. We do hurricane relief work. We do this, that, and the other. Please, be kind to us. You can read it in the transcript.
We try to cover over, minimize our flaws, cover our bulges, our blemishes. We try to make ourselves look as good as possible, don't we?
Jesus foretold, "You will be hated by all the nations on account of my name." So we recognize that no amount of effort to educate government officials is going to change that.
We make allowances, excuses if we make mistakes.
In the interests of transparency, do you think that your body and all religious bodies and other voluntary organisations should be required to publish annually data on the number of allegations, the status of those allegations, and the outcome of those allegations, and possibly, if compensation has been paid, the amount of money that's been paid out?
Well, that's a big question. I'd have to sit down. I think we'd have to sit down and think about the answer to that question. In principle, we act on the law of love. We act according to justice. So if there's been some injustice, then naturally we would want to make sure that a person is dealt with in a fair way.
Okay. So you would have to think about it, but you wouldn't necessarily object to it on principle?
On principle, no.
He was begging for mercy. And the moment he walked away from that jury, attorney Neil Smith for the plaintiff got up, bang. Immediately, Joel hadn't even finished his last word, and Neil said, and that is the first time you have ever heard an apology from Jehovah's Witnesses because of the money involved in this case.
Wow.
And I'll never forget him saying that. And he was dead on right, because it wasn't until the jury handed down the $35 million. You didn't hear an apology before that. You did not, okay?
Is the motive really to seek first the kingdom?
I don't think so.
So that's what we're going to now. It's not a problem that's going to go away.
The truth is inside of us, and it's wonderful when we have the courage to tell it. What if I were very, very sad, and all I did was smile? I wonder after a while what might become of my sadness. What if I were very, very angry and all I did was sit and never think about it? What might become of my anger? Where would they go and what would they do if I couldn't let them out? Maybe I'd fall, maybe get sick or doubt. But what if I could know the truth and say just how I feel? I think I'd learn a lot that's real about freedom